Now it's time for a session by one of our event partners for the Corporate Counsel Summit 2020, LegalVision. And this one's going to be presented by Thomas Kaldor, Head of LegalVision's Legal Transformations. Now, the Q&A for this session is going to be facilitated in the live Q&A box on the right-hand side of the page. But remember, if you'd like to speak to one of our representatives from LegalVision, go to the virtual exhibition where you can request a meeting or a live chat. Remember also, there's that feedback survey at the end of the session. But now, please join me in welcoming Thomas Kaldor.
Hi everyone, hope you're enjoying the Corporate Counsel Summit so far, brought to you by Lawyers Weekly. We've got a spotlight session here with our good partners at LegalVision, and I'm joined by the Head of Legal Transformation at LegalVision, Tom Kaldor, and we're going to be talking about the new General Counsel Toolkit from the new law provider. Tom, so good to have you here.
Great to be back in the studio chatting with you, Jerome. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm really pleased to have you. So as I said, we're talking about the GC Toolkit, which LegalVision just launched earlier in October. And we wrote about that when it first came out, but it'd be good to learn a little bit more about the toolkit, what it is, who it's aimed at, and what it is it's hoping to achieve as we move towards this post-pandemic landscape. So could you give us a bit of an overview of the toolkit?
For sure. Very excited to be chatting about the GC Toolkit and also how we're applying it on the ground with some clients, particularly in our enterprise managed services offering. It was actually something that we thought about pre-pandemic, and that's probably explained why it's about 10 months later that we're really excited to launch it into the world on what is Donut Day for Australia. Hopefully things settling back down, people getting ready to get back to the things they were focusing on in 2019 and some of the priorities for their in-house function. But basically the GC Toolkit is intended as a set of resources, tools and tips that in-house teams can use to do some of the things that are on their radar to improve the way they're working. And essentially the idea came to us because as a new law provider, we are out there in the space talking about transformation. There were two things that we observed that were kind of a bit of a tension. As you know, there's a lot of talk about legal design, legal operations, legal transformation. Feels like an eternity ago that we were chatting about legal operations with Maria Carroll, probably about a year ago, but it
was a good conversation.
A good conversation in a very different world. And obviously those things are still a priority, and there's still a lot of discussion, as I'm sure everyone's been hearing on this conference over the last day and into tomorrow. But equally, as a new law provider that was trying to get some projects up and running with a number of great clients, we're observing that clients were just finding it hard to get started, to know where to start their transformation journey. And so we really wanted to put out a resource that moved past the sort of conceptual white paper style of discussion, this is what a transformation looks like in theory, and talk more about how do you actually get your hands dirty and make transformation happen on the ground. And so that was the sort of intention and aspiration behind the toolkit, and we're really excited to have launched it about a month ago.
Now, there's about 30 different cards that this toolkit has, and in this 15-minute session we of course don't have time to go through all 30, but I identified 3 that I thought would be really good to talk about and for the audience to learn more. And the first one that I picked up on was mapping legal processes. So could you tell us first of all what process mapping means, why it's important, but also how LegalVision as a new law provider and collaborator with in-house legal departments, how you use process mapping in order to best serve clients.
For sure. I might just touch on the terminology of cards to start with, because I know you've had the advantage of having an early look at the toolkit for the great article that we appreciate you wrote about it. But basically, instead of it being structured as a single publication, it is, as you say, 30 cards. And so the cards are kind of essentially a bit like this, and they come in a box. And the thinking here again was to give something that could sit on in-house teams' desks or remote offices, as the current situation dictates, and not that it be read a one time and then forgotten about, but more that it could be interacted with as needed while the in-house teams are running projects. And so those 30 cards that you mentioned are split into kind of 5 phases that we see as critical along a transformation journey. So understanding what's going on in the industry, mapping your own legal function, understanding the options and the collaborators and partners that are out with to work with, then looking at a business case for getting a project off the ground, and finally kind of running a successful project and measuring success. And within those 5 phases, we wanted to offer cards that did 3 different things. First of all, what we call understand cards, which is kind of just like a bit of an explainer, but again, done as hopefully as quickly as possible in one or 2 pages. Secondly, the critical part of the toolkit, which is the tools or the act cards. It's where you're actually trying to do something, and this is going to show you how to make it happen. And finally, some case studies that we call the experience cards. And so, yeah, really happy to have a chat about some of them and give examples around how we're using them in practice. So the first one you mentioned is around process mapping. And I think that the first thing would say about process mapping, it's a tool card within the toolkit, and it's one that LegalVision uses a lot. The first thing that's really important when you're embarking on process mapping is working out whether you want to be mapping current state or future state. And we see this kind of conflated quite a bit, and it's a really quick trap to avoid, because they're 2 different sort of objectives when you're doing process mapping. Either you want to look here and now at what's going wrong so you can find the pain points to fix, or you want to talk about what a perfect paradise of a legal process would look like so you can work towards that. And it's really important to keep those separate so you can make sure that it's happening on the ground. And when it comes to sort of what we're doing in the kind of enterprise in-house team space, what we call our managed service offering, we've seen both of those examples play out, particularly with our advertising review marketing compliance offering. And so particularly with our foundational clients, so some of the early clients we had on board, Domain, IAG, the workshops we ran were very much focused on, what's the current situation, what's going on in your in-house function, and looking at the kind of critical steps and where the problems or pain points were. And often that's when sort of teams interact, like the marketing team is handing off to the legal team or vice versa. And doing those workshops and using process mapping enabled us to quickly find for our initial cohort of clients, where the pain points were. Now that the offering is more developed and more mature, thanks to the collaboration with those clients, when we run a workshop, we're often doing more of a future state mapping, showing them this is what kind of the holy grail could look like for your advertising review process. And then we're asking questions more, what would be needed in your environment to make this process work? They're 2 different examples of process mapping, equally valid, but it's just really important to know, which one you're embarking on to get started.
Well, it's really good to have those case studies that you just outlined there. It certainly helps me better understand and appreciate what it is that the toolkit is offering. The next one I wanted to ask you about was building a business case. And similar question, I want to ask, what exactly this is and, why it's important. And, if you have any particular examples that you might be able to share, successful business cases that you've worked on, so that GCs could better understand why this particular card will be critical.
For sure. The business case part is just absolutely critical from our perspective, because we know that the business case is what's going to define whether or not we're able to continue working with that client. But for in-house teams, it's arguably even more critical, because invariably the in-house teams want to achieve this, but there's realities on the ground, whether it's resourcing, budget, whatever the case may be. And the rest of the organization is used to kind of fighting for those things through the mechanism of a business case.
Sure.
But it's relatively new in the legal space and the GC sort of sector, and largely thanks to movements like legal operations showing the importance of using this. So, when we're talking to a new client, we actually now, within that process and that funnel, we talk a lot about the kind of business case phase. And so that's when the client understands what we want to do together, but we know the next step is to kind of convince the other stakeholders within their business. And so it's one that we like to get our hands kind of dirty and involved with the client when they're trying to tackle it. But ultimately, it comes down to the sort of advocate, often the GC, senior in-house lawyer, who's pushing that within the business. But what, you asked for an example of a successful business case. One that sticks to mind for me is really when we started working with IAG on the advertising review offering, and Anna Golovsky, who runs the agility legal team there. Everyone I'm sure knows of her as a leader in the kind of legal ops space.
Absolutely.
it taught us a lot really around how we think about business cases. And she was talking to us about what she was putting forward to the business, and specifically said, it'd be really good to articulate the benefits of this offering, and particularly how they compare to the other options on the table. And so we put a lot of work into how we pitch the benefits, not just to Anna, who was already completely on board with doing it, but for the people Anna needed to convince. And ultimately, big chunks of what we were putting to her were obviously being passed in internally to build the case for change within her organisation. And so having a client like that obviously makes it a lot easier for us to get traction, because we know, as I said, convince that person, and they're working internally to make the business case come to life.
Now, as I said, there's 30 of these cards within the toolkit, and of the 28 that are remaining, there's so many that we could go through. But one that really stuck out to me was the idea of running a retrospective workshop. And I found this to be quite a curious idea. And correct me if I'm wrong, but does this mean you're doing an autopsy on a matter once it's completed, understanding everything that happened between getting from A to B, what worked, what didn't work? Is that what it is? And why is this important? And then I suppose also, how do you convince a client that this is important? This one's quite interesting to me.
For sure. Essentially, I'd say, it is a bit of an autopsy. Probably the main difference is you're through the retrospective trying to get a culture where people aren't thinking of something having died, but really an opportunity for improvement. And that's really, the type of lesson that comes from agile project management and design thinking, this idea of wanting continuous improvement and having practices to be able to achieve that. And the toolkit, borrows from a lot of that methodology and tries to bring it into the legal space, because, as I hinted at earlier, those words get talked about a lot in the space, but we're still not seeing enough of these practices being used. So the hope was, through putting a card like the retrospective card in the deck, people might start actually trying out some of these practices, conventions and customs in their in-house teams. The retrospective workshop is a really important one, and one that we're committed to in how we run the business at LegalVision internally, and we're committed to in how we work with clients, and we hope some of that will rub off and clients will try it within their own teams. But essentially it's an opportunity for teams in a structured way to get together and reflect on what's happened. You mentioned being focused on the matter end to end. In an ideal world, everyone would have time to do it for every matter, but realistically, it's probably more at a project level. So what you do, basically, you kind of get in a room, all the key people involved, and you run through a couple of simple questions. That the most simple structure for a retrospective is, what's working well, what needs improvement, and then you're kind of prioritizing themes and importantly, coming out of that with actions. And it's a really funny thing, because in the legal space, and as a lawyer, I know this very well, and it's taken me years to try and improve it in myself, and I'm still struggling with it, is you want your work to be perfect, and you don't want to be criticized, and you don't want feedback. But really, particularly when you're trying something new, innovative, transformative, it's absolutely critical to be able to flush those things out, because, unlike an autopsy, there is this opportunity to bring new life into a project and to achieve something better than what you had before. And you can only really realize that opportunity if everyone's in a frank and constructive way talking about what's working well and what's not working well.
And I suppose that would really offset any concerns that professionals have about the additional time and money that needs to be expended in order to have that retrospective workshop. For sure.
It's a great ROI activity in our view, as long as you're coming out of it with actionable sort of steps and things you can do. If it's just a talk fest, or worse, an opportunity to whinge, then it's not really a great use of time, and no one should put the budget aside for it. But if you can spend an hour coming up with some great actions that respond to people's things they're loving and things they're hating, then you're doing really well.
And that's all it would take, really, if it's an hour or two to really nut out those things, and then you're going to be in a much better position than you were before that.
For sure. I mean, the rhythm and the cadence really depends on the project, and if you're coming from the software world, developers do these things sometimes every 2 weeks. maybe that's a bit too exhausting and not realistic for lawyers. But a great example with the ad review offering, we've probably only done a handful of these, mainly internally, because the pace of change and improvement has been happening organically. But once you move a project into steady state and you're chipping away at things, that's when you want to make sure retrospectives are built into the standard operating procedures.
Absolutely. Alrighty, I just got a couple of rapid fire questions for you before we
sure.
wrap things up. First of all, how do in-house teams get started with their transformation projects? Certainly the toolkit might be a good place to start.
Yeah, look, that's probably the rapid fire answer that I have. Not so much the toolkit, but actually looking to do something in practice on the ground and taking a small incremental step rather than trying to say, my aim here is to radically transform my whole function.
Yeah. Will such transformation be applicable just to certain kinds of legal departments, or are these general principles that anyone can utilise?
We hope, and again, it's sort of the choose your own adventure framework that we had.
I like that.
Yeah,
great.
Not quite as good as those novels that you used to get as a kid and jump through. But choose your own adventure in the sense of, maybe some teams will be able to use all 30 of these cards on a monthly basis. Other teams might get a huge benefit from the know your industry cards because they're much earlier in their transformation journey. Others will be running these projects already and just want to look at the measuring success cards. It's really up to the in-house team and the GC to say, what can I get out of this toolkit? We think there's great advantage there. But from what we've seen, realistically, we are strong believers that there are places to start and prime hunting grounds for transformation, and trying to focus your energies in those areas is just going to mean it's much less likely that you'll have the sort of fatigue that happens when you're pushing an innovation kind of rock up a hill for too long. And the areas that we've spotted to be prime for transformation are areas where there's a decent volume of similar work happening. But that work is still of some importance to the business. There's still value being driven there because that really helps with the business case that we talked about earlier. And so, a great example of something that hits those two marks for us has been very much focusing on the advertising review space. And we've found that that's been a great way for clients who are keen to start transformation projects to show this works. And then you might jump onto, a harder frontier like transforming your litigation practice, which we all know is kind of the final state of legal transformation perhaps in the industry.
Of course. And just my final question for you, where have you seen the most success for clients with such transformation? And I ask this from the perspective of, say, if a legal department is, they're interested in what you're talking about here with the toolkit, but there's still some lingering reluctance or skepticism. What's your elevator pitch to those professionals?
Around transformation or around the toolkit?
Around the success that can arise as a result of...
Yeah, again, very, very similar to the things I'd say earlier. If you're able to find an area where there's a steady flow of work, where you're still driving value to the business, where you can have someone internally who can be the advocate and drive it, then taking this toolkit on, trying some of these things out, giving milestones that are incremental but still, moving you along the journey, you're really going to, see some big impact in the way your legal function works. And importantly, you're going to be showing the type of progress that is expected across your organisation. And we'll move out of that sort of legal is protected, legal is very different, because now increasingly through the legal ops movement and other forces within the industry, we know legal is no different. It has its own unique set of sort of circumstances, but we have to move forward with doing things more efficiently, doing things more effectively. That was a long elevator ride, but you get what I'm saying.
I do get what you're saying, and I'm sure everyone else will too. Tom Kaldor, thank you so much for joining me for this spotlight conversation. And for those who are interested in the toolkit, where can they learn more about it? Yeah,
thanks for asking. So the toolkit's available as a digital version online on our website, so jump on and you'll be able to download that. Equally, we have a run of the physical thing. We were talking talking earlier, looks a little bit like a sort of a card box that can sit on your table and open it whenever you want and find the card that you want. We're really excited about that. We love using it within our business, so we'll have some of them available as well. And what we'd say is if you're interested in a physical copy, we'd love to chat you through the best way to use the toolkit, because we don't want something sitting on people's tables that they're not using. So let us have a message and we'll come and see you, and we'll have a video conference and we'll chat about how to use the toolkit, and you can get a physical copy as well.
Well, Tom, it's been great to chat to you, and once again, we really appreciate LegalVision partnering with us for the Corporate Counsel Summit.
Really great chatting with you, Jerome, and all the best.
And thanks to you guys for tuning in for this Spotlight session. We really appreciate it. Hope you're enjoying the Corporate Counsel Summit, and we'll see you again across the course of these 2 days. Cheers.
Thanks very much to LegalVision for their support of this event, and thanks Thomas also for that fantastic session. Remember, if you've got any questions for Thomas or you'd like to find out more about LegalVision, head over to their booth now in the virtual exhibition or book a meeting with their representatives in the meeting hub. There's a great number of resources available for you there. You can download them, and there's more great prizes that will be given away as well. Remember, if you took notes yourself during that session, you can email them to yourself by pressing the export button on the top right-hand side of your screen. You will hear a bell letting you know when the next session is about to start, so we'll see you soon.